1948 in the South Asian subcontinent after the partition and the independence of two new states as the British Empire in the subcontinent came to an end. In retrospect, the most remarkable aspect of this refugee crisis was the fact that it was handled by the two countries concerned, that is India and Pakistan, without any assistance or involvement of the international community. The second case study that I will address will be the Afghan refugee crisis, which has now existed for more than 2 decades and has indeed involved and continues to involve the international community, particularly the United Nations, refugee and other agencies, in providing humanitarian assistance and assistance in all other respects. The post-independence India-Pakistan refugee crisis and the Afghan refugee crisis have had very significant impacts on Pakistan. They've been caused by historically contradictory forces. They have drawn a very different response from the international community. Their impact on the receiving country has been very different in many respects. One refugee crisis, that is the India-Pakistan, has been resolved very effectively. The other, the Afghan crisis, continues to fester, not only in the receiving country, but also in the country from which the refugees have fled. I doubt very much that I can provide you with answers to all of the very many questions that arise from these cases. But I'm hoping that the questions that may arise in your minds, I'm sure there'll be many, or some that I may pose to you, will enrich our discussion that will follow today. But before I go on to describe the salient aspects of the two cases, I will provide you with a brief introduction to the main refugee agencies of the United Nations for your background information, as well as to assist with an understanding of the various developments in situations where the UN is involved. Perhaps the principal reason why the UN and the international community did not become involved in the India-Pakistan refugee crisis is probably a simple one. In 1947, it was that it occurred too soon after the creation of the United Nations. Another reason could well be that the United Nations at that time, dominated by European and Western countries, fully dominated, that is, there it was felt that the crisis was too far away from Europe and was in any case being dealt with by one of the major powers, that was the United Kingdom. In any event, soon after the two other crises occurred in Europe. One had preceded the creation of the UN agencies, and it had also preceded the India-Pakistan crisis, and that was the existence of some 1.2 million refugees in Europe as a result of the Second World War. And the other was the refugee crisis that followed the events in the Middle East, the Palestinian-Israeli crisis, of 1948. The first was the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, which was established in 1951 for a period of 3 years to deal with the European refugees. It was only much later that the mandate was broadened, and today the UNHCR deals with a much larger number of countries all over the world. The other was, of course, the Palestinian crisis, which we will talk to in a moment. These organizations created almost simultaneously the UNHCR, which later became much bigger, today has some 6,000 employees. It has a budget of close to $1 billion, of which the last figure I saw was for a year and a half ago. It was at the level, the US contribution was at the level of about $259 million, and covers almost 20 million refugees and internally dispersed persons today, and has over the decades dealt with some 50 million refugees and internally displaced persons. The Palestinian organization, the UNRWA, which deals with Palestinian refugees today, has some 23,000 employees and has a budget of close to 350 million, of which again about 25% is provided by the United States. The legal foundations of UNHCR and how it deals with refugee crisis need to be, at least the salient points need to be brought out in order to enable you to have a proper background for the discussions that will follow. And that is contained in the Refugee Convention of 1951. Under the convention, a refugee is defined as a person who has a well-founded fear of persecution because of his or her race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group or political opinion, and is unable or unwilling to avail himself of the protection of his original country or to return for fear of persecution. The UNHCR has two basic and closely related aims: to protect refugees and to seek ways to help them restart their lives in a normal environment. Protection in this context means ensuring respect for the refugees' basic human rights, ensuring that no person will be returned involuntarily to a country where he or she fears persecution. In the context of helping the refugees restart their lives, the High Commissioner seeks to assist those who wish to return to their original country, or failing that, to assist them in resettling in the host country where they find themselves, or in third countries willing to accept refugees. Of course, the UNHCR provides whatever assistance, material assistance is needed to meet their immediate needs of shelter, clothing, food, etc. And also for training them and to make a livelihood, particularly the younger generation, to make a livelihood wherever they find themselves. The other refugee organization, which is again the Palestinian Refugee Organization, which I described earlier, provides